I did have one pretty spectacular night, and I can talk about this because my congressional testimony is out there, but I was the PDB briefer on duty the night of Benghazi.
Welcome to Combat Story. I'm Ryan Fugit, and I served Warzone tours as an Army attack helicopter pilot and CIA officer over a 15-year career. I'm fascinated by the experiences of the elite in combat. On this show, I interview some of the best to understand what combat felt like on their front lines. This is Combat Story. Today we have a great combat story that ranges from the military intelligence tactical front lines of counterterrorism in the Korean Peninsula to the most strategic of all, serving as the PDB briefer to the President of the United States, with Senior Intelligence Officer Michelle DiGruttolo. I strongly encourage you to listen to the end of this podcast to get a full appreciation of Michelle's experience as the President's briefer. To include her role as the briefer during the Benghazi Consulate attack, you can, of course, listen to our previous interview with Kris Tanto Paranto, who was on the ground during that attack, to hear both the front lines and halls of leadership perspectives on that pivotal day. Michelle began her career as an Army intel officer and then transitioned to DIA. She would eventually lead a division of 40 fellow analysts. While at DIA, she was handpicked to compile and deliver the President's Daily Brief, also known as the PDB, to then President Obama and his Chief of Staff, Jack Lew. The PDB role to POTUS is not a political appointment, and it is only entrusted to the elite of the intel community's analytic core, which Michelle is. As always, we do not get political in this podcast. However, to ensure we hear both sides, we also have former President Trump's PDB briefer booked for later this summer to understand what her experience was like in the Oval Office under another administration. Michelle also briefed and/or worked closely with retired senior leaders Petraeus, McChrystal, and Clapper at the height of their roles, and several other household names across her career, exposing her to leadership at the very highest levels. After service, Michelle went on to found Sage Raven Advisors, where she leverages an extensive network of local advisors, partners, and affiliates, couples them with cutting-edge technology and data analytics to provide actionable and timely insights to clients in complex and dynamic geopolitical landscapes. I really hope you enjoy this interesting deep dive to the life of a career military intel officer and the life of a PDB briefer to the President as much as I did. Michelle, thanks so much for taking the time to share your story with us.
I'm so delighted to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah. So when we were trying to coordinate this the first time around, we ran into a little bit of an issue on my end. But as we were coordinating again, you mentioned something that really struck me. I think what you mentioned was you spend 6 hours on Mondays reading. And given what you do as an analyst, as a career, and you've got Sage Raven Advisors now, could you just talk us through what are you doing during that time frame? What are you reading? What's your structure and approach, since you're a veteran intel analyst, so I'm sure this is from years in the making.
Yeah, so I actually built my own sort of open source ingestion platform. I subscribe to about 3,000 different, subscriptions, like ingests, which I couldn't possibly read all by myself. So I needed some technology. So I read everything from like the Economist Intelligence Unit I subscribe to Financial Times and Wall Street Journal, to trade rags, right? Like what's happening in oil and gas, what's happening in pharma, what's happening, like, so I can sort of keep up with trends and what's happening, how companies are using technology. Some is decisive technology, some is just, disruptive technologies. And I have a personal format that I use, which I actually didn't learn until I went to business school. It would have helped me so much if I would have known this when I was in Intel school. But it started out as a marketing intelligence, sort of like a framework, or if you will. And marketing is pretty much targeting, right? Like it's the same. And so it's called the pestle. I didn't make it up.
What's it called?
But the pestle. Yeah. So P is political, E is economic, S is social, the second S is security, T is technology, L is legal, regulatory, and compliance, and E is environmental. So I look for the connection points between those different factors. And so my little platform, which is very clunky and ugly, but works for me. What it does is it like ingests all these different sources of news and information about, all of those categories, right? All 6 of those categories. And what it does for me is it bundles things, right? So, if an event happens, right, like Hamas attacks Israel, I don't have to read every single thing that comes into my inbox that says exactly the same thing, right? So what my little platform does is it bundles all of those things that are basically the same. And so I only have to read one article about the attack, the Hamas attack. But what's great about it is it tells me about that Hamas attack from a bunch of different angles and aspects, right? So I'm not just getting that one perspective about, the political piece of this or the conflict, the security piece or whatever. I'm getting different sort of lenses. And so I like to call it the kaleidoscope. So, like when you look into a kaleidoscope, all the little pieces in the bottom, they stay the same. But when you like move that kaleidoscope just a little bit, you get a totally different picture. You didn't add any new data or any new information. You just sort of adjusted the lens and now it was a butterfly and now it's a mushroom, right? Or whatever. So, so I look at that event, whatever is happening, let's say like, the Hamas event, from, what are the political ramifications? What are the economic consequences? Will this affect technology? How will this have an impact on compliance? Will there be like new sanctions? Will there be regulatory regimes in place or whatever? So that's kind of what I do, and that's what takes me so long to read all of that stuff.
Interesting. And for those publications, if you had to only pick like 2 or 3, and obviously it's hard when you go across the spectrum, political, economic, trade, tech, environmental, but if you were like, hey, there are 2 or 3 that I have to read, what comes to mind for you?
Well, The Economist, for one, is like I read that every single day because they do a pretty good job of addressing the entire spectrum. And then I don't know, I couldn't just pick 1 or 2. I don't think I could just do that, right? And a lot of it depends on what's happening, right? Is it economics heavy? Because Bloomberg's my go-to for economics. If it's finance, it's FT, Financial Times. If it's something domestic, right, domestic politics, I really think that the New York Times does a pretty good job of outlining what the issues are. They don't do a great job of unbiased coverage, but they do tell you what everyone's talking about, right? So then I can go and say, okay, these are the top 5 things I should research further or whatever. But yeah, it really just depends on, what's the issue of the day, the crisis du jour. So.
We're going to get into your career, and you go from very tactical on the military side to briefing the PDB and, collating all kinds of intelligence. But my understanding, I was on the operations side at the agency, obviously worked a lot with analysts, but in my mind, being selected as a PDB briefer was kind of a next level within the analytic community. And I'm asking you to check me on my bias here. Like that's how I would look at folks. And then certainly being selected to brief the president would be kind of the tier 1 equivalent almost from a special forces analogy, special operations analogy. Is that how it's looked at within the analytic community? Or are there other markers that somebody's trying to hit on their way up besides just being that PDB briefer?
So from a military perspective, that wasn't even on my radar, right? Because I was the first and to my knowledge, still the only ever military person. And the reason that I was chosen was because, well, first of all, most military people don't ever apply for that job because it's not a military coded job, right? And I happened to be considering leaving the military. And I was like, hey, I asked my boss at the time, I was like, do you think this would be a good idea for me to apply just to get interview experience, right? And to learn how to write a resume, because, in the military, we don't write resumes, right? And here I am, I'm 40 something years old and I've never had to write a resume. I'm like, I probably should do this. And he's like, that's a great idea. Because both of us thought I would never get it, right? So he's like, yeah, definitely do that. And then when I got the call, and it was funny because I actually didn't even apply for the PDB job. I applied for, PDB, but not for briefing the president. I was applying to brief the SecDef. And I was like,
Makes
because I'm
sense.
a military
Yeah.
person, right? And so when they called me from DNI and they said, this is the DNI and, we're calling to set up an interview for you to, because you've been selected to interview for briefing the president. I was like, ha ha, very funny. And I hung up because I thought it was my friends just making fun of me. I thought they were just like messing with me. Called me right back and said, okay, don't hang up on me again. And I was like, oh my God, this is real.
Wow.
So yeah, so that was never even on my radar as a, I was thinking J2 positions. For me, that's the pinnacle of success, right? If you get to be the J2 of a task force or, or of any pretty sizable unit, that's success, right? Not PDB. So, and I think the reason that they chose me was because they had been having a hard time with President Obama at the time to get to engage, right? Like he was not engaging with the intelligence community. And they wanted to shake things up. And I had just come off of I think it was like 15 or 16 months working down in the Pentagon as the chairman's briefer, doing the chairman's daily intelligence brief. And they were like, was he responsive? Did you, I was like, yeah, he was totally responsive. I mean, he's asked a lot of questions. At that strange time, though, he was very focused on piracy because it was a Navy guy. I was like, dude, we have boots on the ground. Like, I was like so like Army focused, and he was, of course, very Navy focused. But they left, and I think that's what actually got me the job was that, like I was able to joke around with the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff about, like, okay, you're really focusing on a lot of Navy stuff here, but this is a ground war. Like maybe we might want to do some ground intel, So yeah, so I think that's how I got it.
Who you mentioned that the first from the military, and I assume this is when we say military, that's encompassing DIA, really. Like DIA could be conventional military, but presumably analysts coming out of DIA. Who typically fills those slots for people listening?
GS-15s, very, very senior intelligence officers who have a breadth of experience in a lot of different areas. And it's usually very competitive. But I guess it wasn't the year that they selected me.
Don't say that. Don't say that.
No, well, I mean, no, really. Like, I was very surprised. There were only 3 of us that actually like interviewed. So, I don't know if like not a lot of people applied or, it was that weird thing because also that same year was the year that they were trying to get the president to transition away from a paper book to the iPad, to the digital. So like a lot of the questions they asked were, how comfortable are you with technology and this, that, and the other? And so maybe a lot of people were like, yeah, I don't own an iPad. I don't know how to use an iPad or whatever. So, I mean, there could have been a lot of different factors. So
I think you might be selling yourself short, but in terms of which agency typically has those slots, if it's not usually DIA, I assume it goes often to CIA, but are there other parts of the intel community that end up filling that?
Yeah, so I'll just jump right into how it kind of works if you like.
Yeah.
So I didn't know any of this before I started. So the DNI, the reason the DNI is running, the PDB now is because they kind of wanted to punish the CIA who used to own it after 9/11, right? And they thought, well, we won't miss anything if we have, if everybody is contributing. Well, that didn't really actually happen, right? I mean, it was still mostly the CIA, and it's still produced at the CIA, not at the DNI. Yeah. It's not at Liberty Crossing. It's still at OHB. So, so anyway, when they revamped the whole PDB system, they brought in all 17 agencies. So all 17 agencies get to compete for all the briefing spots, right? And it goes up and down, but there are usually at least 17 briefers because each principal gets his or her own briefer, right? So, so a lot of people don't know that or like how it even works, but usually the president's PDB, he has 2 PDB briefers. He has a PDB briefer that does like, well, when I was there, it was like 2 weeks of days and then 2 weeks of nights. And that was, because we, well, back then we had just brought on, I don't know if you remember this, the walk-ons, the PDB walk-ons.
I did not know this. No.
Oh, yeah, that was a nightmare when I was an analyst and then like a branch chief. And then when I was actually the PDB briefer. But walk-ons are, so the person that's on the day shift, reads like I do now, right? Reads for like 6 or 7 hours. They're just reading intel. That's all they're doing, reading and highlighting and putting aside things that the night briefer, who's going to be the day briefer, like for the president, right? Highlighting and putting aside things. Hey, this should go in the book, or this is an update to a question that the president asked, or that I also had to. I briefed the chief of staff, Jack Liu. He was very, very prolific question asker. Like he was super dialed in. Very, like the president was, very interested, but not as like dialed into like a lot of the nitty gritty.
Yeah.
I was amazed at how much stuff Jack Liu could hold in his brain. Like I'm like, wow, that was from a briefing like 5 weeks ago. Like, and he would connect the dots and whatever. So anyway, so that's kind of how it works. Is you have a day briefer who comes in and they read all the traffic, they highlight everything, and they make notes. And they also do they prepare what are called the PDB walk-ons, and that is current intelligence that is developing and urgent that we think the president or members of his staff should be aware of. It is oftentimes it's raw intelligence, right? It's not analyzed or whatever, but it's of significant enough, like substance that, hey, we think this, you should know, right? We're not sure about this, right? We've got a collection emphasis to confirm or deny, but if this is true, this is a big, paradigm shift or something that needs to be reacted to or whatever. And at the time, it was the DNI, which was General Clapper, and the PDDNI, which was Robert Cardillo at the time. Yep. And they would brief the walk-ons, right? So we would prepare and we would say, here's 10 or 15 things that you could talk to the president about. And that was also part of the whole get the president engaged in intelligence, get him to understand what we can do, how we can help, because he was very resistant, from what I understand, resistant to having that relationship and maybe not as trustful of intelligence, maybe after 9/11 or whatever. But so that was a way to engage. So Clapper would go through 17 like articles in his 1 hour with the president. I mean, like shotgun, like ju. Whereas Cardillo had a different style, and he was like, he would yell at you if you didn't actually do a little analysis, right? Like, yes, this is like a developing thing, but what do you think, right? He's like, I don't pay you all this money, which wasn't, by the way, very much, but he's like, I don't pay you all this money to just read me the news, right? He's like, I want to know what you think, right? And where does it fall in the arc of the story, right? So that's what the person who comes in during days does, right? So we have a turnover, and the person who had come in overnight, prepared the briefing and briefed the president, would talk to the person that was coming in during the day and say, here's what the president asked, here's, what the chief of staff asked. And then you get a bunch of others, like from, Secretary of State or FBI or Treasury or whatever. And then you pass that on you go to the CIA's, morning briefing, and you say, here's what was asked. And then they task that out to the right people. And you say, how long do you think it'll take you? Was he expecting it tomorrow or a week or whatever? And so then they take care of all that stuff.
Jeez. So we're going to come back to the PDB time. This just fascinates me, but I want to dig in a little bit to how you grew up. Real quick though, I know you're being very humble, like, oh, there are only 3 of us. And people do not believe that for a second. If you're listening, they don't just let anybody walk into the Oval Office to do this. But when you're trying to read through all of that information and figure out what's important and then remember it for these questions, and even today, is there anything that you have, your approach to reading, the structure that you do, that helps you retain that you've learned over time, or you just can absorb as you go through? Do you take notes? How do you remember this?
Well, I do use a highlighter. I don't really take notes because we don't really store a lot. Remember, everything was on, I was used to JWIC, so we had like, which was your system, which was, anyway, that's a conversation for another podcast. But anyway, and, being up there at, OHB, you can't really print very much stuff off, right? I mean, they're like very anti-printing. So
OHB is the original headquarters building, just for people listening. It's like the main compound of the CIA's headquarters. Okay, sorry.
Yes,
go ahead.
up on the 7th floor. Yes, we're on the 7th floor of OHB. So we would print things, but only like a few things, and you only printed the additional material that you really thought should go into the president's book, right? Or be briefed to the chief of staff or whoever. But I'll tell you what really helped me was, well, a couple of things. One, I have synesthesia. I don't know if you know what that is,
I do
but
not.
I'm neurodivergent, which obviously anyone who's met me knows. And not only am I like ADHD, but I see things in color in my brain, right? I organize things in color in my brain. So that's partly why the pestle thing works really well for me. Like I literally see like political things pink in my head. I see economic as blue. So it's very weird. It just
Wow.
categorizes things in my head. And then the other thing that really helped is you have to, before you take the role, you have to spend quite a bit of time reading through the last year's PDBs, right? So you have to know what the president's already been told, where, like, remember that phrase, arc of the story? You have to know where we are in the arc of the story in every, like, major situation, right? But that's why we have the NIPIF, right? Like the National Intelligence Priorities Framework, because otherwise you'd have to memorize more things than anyone could possibly memorize. But if you know they're in the top 20 things, right, that we care about, then you really only worry about those top 20 things, right? What was hard for me was two of those things were things that I had zero experience with as an Army intelligence officer. And one was economic intelligence, because I had this role in 2012, which was when Grexit was happening, right? And I had no idea, like, why do we even care about Greece leaving? I don't like olives, go. Like, so so that was one thing I had to learn very fast and try to understand. But it's great because the agency, your agency, well, ours did too, like DIA, they both had economic analysts. So if you spent the time, you sat down there, which I had to do for like 2 days, I had to sit down and be like, can you explain all this stuff? I mean, that was like way a long time ago, like supply and demand. And they're like, yeah, it's a little more complex than that. But so that was the first thing. And then the second thing was the nuclear piece, right? Like I had never like been in a role where I had to worry about counterproliferation or know anything at all about nuclear stuff, which, by the way, is very like there's a lot and like super sciencey, right? So I'm not mathletic. I am a word nerd. So that was a challenge for me.
Wow.
So I sat with those guys for a while. But that really helped a lot to sort of, key in. And then once you get in the swing of things, I'm sure you remember, like, it's whatever the crisis du jour is, right? Yeah. And then randomly, like, hey, Netanyahu is coming for a visit, right? So then he'd want like some intel briefing on, like, what was the last thing we agreed to? What did we talk about? Like, any issues I should be aware of, blah, blah, blah. So, that kind of stuff. Yeah.
So this is a great segue. So the color grading, what is that called? That
synesthesia.
When did you learn in your life that you had that? Was that at a young age?
No, actually, I didn't learn until I left the military. I just thought everybody had that. Like, I didn't know that I was different. I just thought everyone did that. Yeah.
But could you recall in high school, like, history is pink?
Well, history's orange, but yes. Like, yeah.
Wow. And what's your youngest recollection of that, I suppose?
I think probably high school studying for the SATs. Because anytime I had to really like study for something that was more than just one, like, an English test is just English, right? Like, but something that required you to use multiple parts of your brain and to access that's the first time I was really kind of sort of aware of it. And even then it wasn't something I was aware of. It was just, I thought everybody had that. Like, I mean, so.
And you said weird. you were not as strong in math. Was that just like in black and white or something off to the side?
Yeah, I have very bad dyscalculia, or dyscalculia or whatever, which is like people that have dyslexia, but I have that with math. I mean, I can do math, but math is not, like I said, I am not mathletic, and math does not come easily for me. So yeah, if you see me with my fingers, I'm like, I'm probably counting.
Well, you said
So,
you didn't ever plan on being a PDB briefer. So if we go back to kind of high school, what did you think you were going to be one day?
so this is funny. I actually really wanted to work for the UN. Like I was the president of the foreign language club in high school, and like languages always came very easily to me. I took Spanish and French in high school. I always would, try to like learn things on my own, like different languages and things. So I've always had a faculty with languages, and I always thought I was going to be a UN translator. But then, and this is kind of another funny story, but I'm the oldest of four girls in my family, and we are Italian twins because my youngest sister is only 5 years younger than me. So, yeah. So my dad told me when I graduated high school, he gave me this beautiful, watch and a little locket. And he said, I'm just going to tell you that you can have either a very beautiful Italian princess wedding or you can have a college education. So you choose. And I was like, but I want both. And my dad's like, eh. So I ended up going ROTC because they gave me a full ride scholarship and they paid room and board.
Yep.
So I had no idea what I was doing. I had never thought about the Army before that ever. It was just about like the scholarship. And here I was thinking, literally, I don't know if you remember this, but Private Benjamin. Like I was Private Benjamin thinking, I'm going to join the Army. I'm going to go see the world and I'm going to like exercise and be super fit. And, and also there's a pretty good ratio of guys to girls. So this works out well in my favor. So this is what my 17-year-old brain was thinking, probably in color. So.
Did anybody plant that seed with you? Like, was your father in the military, your mother, anyone? Like, when does this happen?
So my dad was in the Navy during Vietnam and was very not happy with me when I went into the Army. But the Navy didn't want me. They're like, oh, your math scores are very bad. And they're like, no.
How much do they really use math in the Navy? I mean, come on.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Agreed.
All right.
But, they didn't want me. Well, they wanted me. They didn't want to give me a good scholarship. Okay. So the Army was like, yeah, we'll pay for everything. And most of my friends were going to Florida State. So it was like, hey, I get a full ride. Yeah. Still get my beautiful princess wedding. It's all working out for me. So, yes. Oh, yeah. Geez. And my grandfather was, he was wounded at Monte Cassino. So he was Army. In fact, when I deployed to Iraq, my mom gave me, sometimes I get choked up about this, but my mom gave me this little tiny chess set he had that was like literally this big. And it was, it had these tiny little chess pieces that he took with him to the war. Way. And yeah. And it was like in this rotting, leather case with a snap that didn't snap well anymore. And one of the hinges was falling off. And yeah. And this teeny tiny little Bible that they gave him, they issued it to them, and I'm not a uber religious person, but I took comfort in that a lot, both of those items. And I felt like, he was there with me when I had questions and, I was, as we all do when you're deployed, when you feel uncertain or whatever, it was sort of a little talisman for me.
How amazing. That is a great story. And it doesn't sound like the military was something completely foreign. So you kind of grew up and heard about it for sure. You get in, and then I guess 4 years of ROTC. This is all pre 9/11, of course. What are you thinking then, getting out and getting ready to start your career? Was it Intel all the way? How did you find your way to that?
So Intel was my first choice. Aviation was my second, and they were like, okay, you're blind and you suck at math. What else do we need to say?
Again, there's zero math. Zero math in aviation.
That flight aptitude standardized test is all math and spatial awareness. And I was like, and there's no colors on here. What is up with that?
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. So it was pretty much Intel because again, I had taken, advanced Spanish and advanced French, and I took a few other classes in college just because I like languages. So I thought, well, Intel is probably a good bet for me. And and I got my first choice, which was Intel. So.
Okay. And then if you could, what was that training like going into Intel at that time? If you can recall.
Fantastic.
High level. Yeah.
I mean, so I don't know what intel or what the training is now, although I have some idea because my oldest son is a combat engineer in the reserves, and my second oldest is he was at the recruiting station today. He wants to go OCS, so I have some idea. But like we were immersed. I mean, like literally for 9 hours a day, we were doing intelligence problems, right? And we learned so much. But back then, so when I came in '92. It was still full to gap scenario. Everything was memorized, the entire WEO, right, which was weapons, equipment, and organization of the entire Russian military. I'm telling you, I had like stacks of what do you call it, flashcards, like this big, because you had to know like what is the maximal effective range and what are, like what's the difference between a hip and a hind and all of that stuff. And then I got selected for 2 follow-on courses from after I graduated from Intel school, and I went to imagery school at the time, which was terrible, by the way, like so bad. I was again very bad at that. Although I should have been very good at it. But like it was looking at these tiny little things. Back then it was a light table. We don't have those anymore, but back then it was a light table, and they would say this squash spider that has like a point on its head over here is this radar, which is associated with this, weapon system. And you're like, okay, I'm glad someone else is going to be doing this and I'm just going to be in charge of these people because like that was hard for me. And then I did the 10 cap course, which was like collection management, which I never used. Like I never actually got to use collection management, but just going through all of these additional courses and learning about SIGINT and all of that was so helpful in all the other, becoming an all source, or I guess they call it now multi-source intelligence officer. It really, really was like invaluable, just getting an understanding. And even in SIGINT, like they managed to teach the dumb person like how to actually like cut your antenna to measure it, like so that it would actually, and how to place it and all of that, like, which is kind of mathy, but the Army's good about dumbing stuff down, right? So
they're great at it.
Yeah.
Oh, geez. So when you get out, is there an option to do kind of HUMINT, SIGINT, imagery? Do you have to select that? Are you chosen for that based on duty assignment? How does that work?
Yeah, so you're chosen to do that. Like I could have taken the HUMINT course, but I took the imagery course instead because I was married at the time to another military intelligence officer. And the only place that we could go, there were only like 2 places that we could go together as lieutenants and both still get good jobs. And that was Panama. So they had no HUMINT slots at Panama. They only had SIGINT and imagery. And he took the 1 slot for SIGINT because he was prior service and he was a 98 Gulf, which is Signals Intelligence NCO. So he took the SIGINT class and I took the imagery class, and we ended up going to Panama. But that's really how it kind of works. And then, as you go through your career, if you are lucky enough to be, to choose an assignment, like when I was in Korea, I got to take another course. So like, hey, we need you to take this, you're going to be running a SIGINT company. So now we need you to go to the SIGINT course or JOCCP or something like that. So that it's kind of needs of the Army. And it's all, like I said, I've told everyone, I have totally Forrest Gumped my way through my career, right? It's really just about being in the right place at the right time and meeting the right people, right? And just being a good person. So when you try to engineer your career, it just never works out well. And if you just take jobs you like, you'll do them really, really well. And if you do them really, really well, it'll lead to other jobs that you like.
I was looking, when I look at your background, seeing Korea on there, obviously pre 9/11, I feel like Korea was the place to be. It's where, still on the DMZ, very active. Certainly from an intel perspective, had to be quite active. Any particular events or memories from that rotation that stick out for you?
Well, I loved Korea because it was my command. It was my first company command. And I had a headquarters and services command, but I also had a SIGINT mission. So, which is very, very unusual, but it was my whole Korea experience. I could do a whole podcast on my Korea experience because I was there for 2 years. And and he's passed away now, so I don't want to call him like my ex-husband, but anyway, my former husband and I both had command at the same time. And that was, oh my goodness, like insane, totally insane.
Both in Korea.
Both in Korea
That's
at the same time,
place?
under the same, yes, in this at Camp Humphreys under the same brigade commander, which is very, very like very rare and not great, like for your marriage. But
yeah, because you're being evaluated against each other, presumably.
Yes, for the one block, right?
And for
only
people,
one of us is going to get it.
So for people listening who have not been in the military, they have this system where only a certain amount of people can get like a top ranking, and you can't have multiple in that. So, yeesh. Okay.
Yeah.
Got it.
Yep. Same brigade commander, same, senior raider. But we survived that. It was, it was okay. But Korea was really great because since I had this headquarters and services command, I had 280 troops, and they were spread across the entire peninsula, including a detachment on the DMZ. So I had the northernmost people and equipment in the whole peninsula. We had 3 detachments of signal maintainers. So we had, those were 3 like I think I can say that radar sites. And we used to, what was great was we had a platoon of 4 Hueys to help us do dedevacs. So to evacuate the detachments and do ration runs, right? So yeah, we had like 3 operationals and an ORF. Which was so much fun. I mean, honestly, like,
and they were under your command also?
So no, they were under the aviation
okay.
command, but they were what do you call that?
Task org.
When they're assigned to me, task org to me. Yep. So
wow.
Yeah, it was great. I mean, it was really great. But Korea, the reason I say I could talk for hours about Korea is so many things happened to me, and I grew up so much in the 2 years that I was in Korea. Like I arrived there a very junior captain, and I left there like thinking like a major or even a lieutenant colonel, just because so many things happened, good and bad. Like we had a typhoon, which, yes, I mean, it was horrible. Like it was 97 or maybe it was 98. We had this massive typhoon and 8 feet of water in the barracks. Like everybody had to evacuate the barracks. My motor pool floated away. Like all of my ammo floated away. Like that's how forceful the water was. And it happened in the middle of the night. It was lightning. And there was this ravine that we had to cross. I had to get all of my soldiers out of the barracks up to high ground, and half my soldiers couldn't swim. And my first sergeant, I really thought he was going to drown because these girls were like hanging on to him, like he's trying to dog paddle or whatever. But like, yeah, it was huge. And we had just survived a horrible 90-day change of command inventory where the outgoing commander had lost accountability for over like $24 million worth of equipment.
Way.
Yes. So my poor like staff sergeant, they literally had to send him back to the United States because he had a mental breakdown after the flood destroyed all of the O's for the property books, all that stuff that he had just spent like 90 days, like, and I'm talking like 14, 15, 16-hour days trying to find stuff, trying to get stuff, right. And yeah, Johnny Tucker, I will never forget Sergeant Tucker. That guy was amazing.
I do not miss those days of property books. So presumably these folks that you have on the DMZ, and if we venture into territory, we shouldn't just say so, but I would imagine you're collecting on what's going on in, north of the border. So like a very tactical, vital mission for the U.S. that's not real. I mean, maybe Kosovo is happening at the time, but of all the things going on, you are really collecting intel that people are reading consistently, I would imagine, in that role.
Yes, it was North Korea and also China. So, like it was a very big mission. It was great. And I had really great folks working for me. I mean, like I loved the hell out of that command, and I loved every one of my soldiers with all of my heart. And, like it was great because as an officer, I got to live off post. So I had like a kitchen. So I would like make cookies and cupcakes and brownies and stuff. And, like we all just got along really well. 280 people. That doesn't
That's
happen
amazing.
a lot, and I think that was because we were all in Korea and, without our families and, just doing a real mission and just had that sort of sense of mission and urgency. But I loved it. But I'll tell you what, having Intel guys is totally different, right? Which I didn't realize until I had this headquarters company, right? So I had maintainers and cooks, I had mail people, postal, I had all of them, right? Also Intel people. Well, my Intel guys thought they were bored and thought it would be funny to see if they could take apart a JWICS terminal and put it and like exfiltrate it from the skiff, which they did one piece at a time in their cargo pockets, and they rebuilt it in their barracks.
No.
And I didn't find it until we did a health and welfare inspection. I'm like, what? Yeah. So so that's the difference between like Intel people, and then my postal guy got a DUI on post in the mail van. They reported him at the drive-through at Burger King, right? So this is the difference between Intel and services. But,
oh my goodness, that's so great. All right.
Yeah.
Where are you when 9/11 happens, Michelle?
So this is crazy. I'm nursing my newborn baby. I'm like sitting there, right? Like I had just left recruiting command, right? So I'm still technically the commander, but I'm on maternity leave, and I'm nursing my son, and I see the first plane go into the tower, and I'm like, oh my gosh, that's terrible. And then like when I see the second one, I'm on the phone. I'm like, I know what this is immediately, but I couldn't get through to anybody. Like, cause I was in Raleigh, right outside of Fort Bragg. Everything was completely shut down. Couldn't get through to the Pentagon. I couldn't get through to, my husband. I couldn't get through to anybody. Like, yeah, it was pretty terrible.
I'm going to jump forward here, but you tell me if I'm missing any good story here. But I noticed that you spent 3 years as a CT branch chief once, I think within DIA at the time.
Yep.
Covering effectively during the surge,
yes,
doing counterterrorism operations. Could you take us through some of that? Because this is 05 to 08. I mean, things are cooking off at that time, and you're leading a team from an analytics standpoint to give people a flavor of what that's like. Because people who listen to this have heard the folks on the tip of the spear fighting that battle. But I would imagine you're providing a lot of the targeting packages, the insight that got them on targets.
That's exactly what we did. So it was called JITF CT at the time. I don't know if it's still called that, but that was the Joint Intelligence Task Force for Combating Terrorism. And I was the America's branch chief, which meant at the time it was all the any threats that applied to any of our troops in North America or any of our troops overseas. So even though it wasn't like, the Middle East or whatever, if it had to do with a US troop because the Pentagon was here and technically all troops belong to North America, that was our remit. So that was a very hard time. And I tell people, PTSD is really a hard thing to understand because it makes sense when you're like the person pulling the trigger, right? Like you're seeing that in real time, and you're the one that is causing that action to happen. But I argue that a lot of the folks that worked for me doing target packages, especially the ones that were doing those pattern of life target packages, they had PTSD too, because they're the ones that are telling the shooters which dude to take off the battlefield. And every one of those is someone's father or brother or son or uncle or whatever. And your decision, you are basically jury, judge, and executioner at that point. So that's just something that I live with from that time. And I think a lot of people aren't really aware of that. They don't think of the intel people with PTSD, but especially our folks at Nellis that were doing the UAVs, that we were handing that live targeting intel to, right? And they were conducting those missions. So yeah, that's what we did. We did pattern of life targeting. We had the deck. You probably remember the deck, right? The 52 cards.
Oh yeah, the deck of cards. Yeah.
Yeah, so we had like in our targeting group, like they had the deck on the wall, and each one X'd off one at a time. Which now in retrospect sounds pretty crass, but at the time, that was the only way. Like that was the only morale booster we had at all for this really hard, very, I mean, it's nug work. I mean, it is absolutely nug work. You're basically digging through trash cans digitally is
Yep.
what you're trying to do. And yeah, so yep, so that's what it was like.
For people who don't know about the analytic world, you're in a branch chief role, I think, at that time, and from what I saw, you spend time both on the headquarters side and then deployed. So
Yep.
you kind of see both of this. Could you just give people an idea of like what does a day look like there? What is going on day to day? And I know it's 24 hours, but like for your day as the branch chief in charge of 10 to 12 people, what are you doing day to day for folks?
So at headquarters or deployed?
Well, let's go deployed, I guess. What would a day look
So
like there?
well, every day was different because it really depended on what was happening. When I got there, two major things were happening. So in 2007, we were doing the surge, right? General Petraeus had, come in and said, okay, 15 months, that's the length of a tour, right? Which is like demoralizing,
Yeah.
and, it's really tough. So I came in and I had a bunch of analysts that were like, down in the mouth and not happy. So you kind of have to, you go in and your first responsibility has nothing to do with the intelligence, right? And it has everything to do with taking care of soldiers and trying to get them into a headspace where they can be effective and where they, when they are at their desks, they're actually doing their jobs and not watching, like episodes of Friends and whatever, which is what was going on when I first got there. Or Lost. I'd never even heard of Lost until I deployed.
That was big then. It was big. Yeah.
Yeah, it was very big. Um, so that was the first thing. And we were very lucky because at the SIOC where I was on Camp Slayer, we had a whole bunch of Brits and Aussies working with us. And they were amazing. Like they were funny and witty. And, and because they only did, 4 to 6 month tours, they were, like happier.
Better
And
spirits.
so, yes, better spirits. So they really helped us to kind of lift the morale and the spirits of the other folks that were on the terrorist and foreign fighters team, which was the branch that I was leading at the time. And they had tea every morning. Like they had British tea at like 10 o'clock, and they'd have biscuits and whatever. And, and also we would get care packages, and we would have every day, I would have everybody bring whatever care packages they got, because we would get weird random care packages from like churches and schools and
Yeah.
things that like, all sorts of weird stuff. And every day at 1600, we would do like a care package exchange, right? Because if you got a care package from someone you didn't know, like you had to exchange it with somebody else who got a care package from someone
That
they
is
didn't know.
great.
And then we opened them up and we were like, oh, look, a like 25 pack of chapsticks. Like they must think we're kissing a lot of ass here because I could never use 25
Oh my
chapsticks.
gosh.
Yeah, so so that was the first thing is, get in there and just try to get to know people and give them, as much support, moral support as you can. And then you start working on the hardest things to do, right? Which at the time when we had all these VBIT networks that we were worried about, right? And those are again very time consuming, and nobody wanted to do that, right? Because one, it's very difficult nug work, and two, if you're wrong, people die, right? So nobody really wanted that responsibility. So we just had to find ways. And I had a really great like deputy at the time. His name was Pete Grimm. Well, probably still is Pete Grimm, but anyway, he was really good at helping me to, like connect with each of the, the analysts and to put them in the right position for them, right? And that's, to me, I think that's the whole key to succeeding when you're apart from your family, when you don't really love the work that you're doing because it's very stressful, and you're there for 15 months, right? Like, so we had a lot of Navy folks. I don't know why we had so many Navy folks. We had a lot of Navy IMAs to come because it's a DIA, right? So it's a bunch
Yeah,
of
everyone.
reservists and, like random people. And these poor like Navy folks, did not really have a good handle on how to do like VBID networks and all this like land-based kind of stuff. So there was a lot of training and, a lot of that, just that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Would you all watch some of the strikes happen for packages you may have pulled together?
So that was a reward, right? So if you had put together a target package and we passed it down to Basra, right? Like to, we had the task force, our task force down there, then Basra and Balad, that was the other one,
Yep.
Balad. Yeah, so that would be a treat, right? Like if you did a really great job, you got to go down to Balad and you got to sit there with the operators and see the fruits of your labor. So that became like we used to call it a Scooby snack, right? Like you get a Scooby snack if you do a good job. And
that's cool.
Yeah, so that's kind of what we did. I didn't ever do like I never watched it myself in Iraq. I didn't do that until I was in Afghanistan and I was leading the CJIATF down there. So yeah.
Let's jump to that if we can, because I guess what I saw on the Afghanistan side, it looked like you were almost a general's aide, like an XO to a general.
Yeah.
Was
that
what you're referring to? That?
No. So the first 3 months that I was there, I was General Flynn's EA, and then we were building the CJIATF, the Combined Joint Interagency Task Force, down in Kandahar, and he's like, okay, I can get somebody else to do this, to be an EA. He's like, you don't have to be a genius. He's like, I need you to go down there to Kandahar and help Trace Hurst like build this CJIATF, right? And I'm like, okay, I don't know how to do that, but if you think that's where I should be, that's where I'll go. And that's where I met my current husband. I met him at the CJIATF. He's British, and he was working with Task Force 196, which was the same as our JSOC. So they were like, there were a bunch of different special operations commands down there, and that's basically what the CJIATF was designed to support, was all the special ops in the South.
Jeez. And so you helped and again, just for people listening, they also don't just throw anybody as like an EA to a 2-star, but for those, who.
Yeah. Well, he was a 1-star only.
Okay.
Then, but yeah.
But then you go and you stand up this command. What was that like? Are there any kind of like key lessons learned for you that you look back on from that experience? I mean, I can't even imagine standing something like that up.
Well, it wasn't really that hard because there were already a bunch of experts. The reason that I think General Flynn thought I would be useful is because I knew a lot of people. I'm a social butterfly, even though I'm an introvert. I get to know people and I try to find out, like, what do you do? How can you help? How can I help you? How can you help me? And I had met Sarah Chase. I had met a bunch of people, like she's like, Madam Anti-Corruption for Afghanistan. The CGAR, whose name escapes me right now, but there were a lot of all the like really like high level thinkers. I brought them down and they helped us to sort of figure out what the CJIATF should really be doing. Should it be counter corruption? Should it just be, counter narcotics and counterterrorism? Should it be, and so that's why I said it really wasn't that hard, because it was like bringing together friends, like, hey, can you come down here? Can you give us some advice? Can you, help us? And then at the time, I think the 10th Mountain was switching out with, it was just switching out with somebody. And that was a great time because we had Michelle Bradenkamp, who was the 2 at the time for the 10th Mountain Division. She came in and talk about a wealth of knowledge. That woman has forgotten more than I've ever learned about intel, truly. And she helped us, like, she's like, hey, here's what I need from you, right? And if you can produce this or do that, then, so it wasn't hard. It was not like oh my gosh, this is like really challenging. I've had the PDB job was like that.
Yeah.
This wasn't, like, I know it was setting something up. And also Trace Hurst was actually, the DICEL that was really in charge of making it all work. And, he coordinated with the Brits and the Aussies and, did all that high level stuff. So.
What year? Where are you when the raid goes down for Bin Laden? Were you
So I was at DIA still. Yeah, it was 2011. That was just before I took the PDB job.
the
So
Clapper PDB job?
yeah, so I took that job in 2012, and it was
Okay,
May of 2011
11.
that that the Bin Laden raid happened.
What was that like in the building for folks?
JIT of CT. I mean, I was a JIT of CT. Everybody was like, oh my God. And there were people that were crying and people were laughing. People were like just stunned. I mean, there was the whole range of emotions, right? It was kind of like before that, it was Al Masri. What was his name? I can't remember. AAM. But anyway, that was 2006, right? When we got him, that was such a victory. It was incredible. Truly, like people were cheering and just sort of like our methodology works. And, all of the time and all the effort is worth it. And it was the first time we kind of felt a little bit redeemed after our horrible failure of 9/11, right? Like that
Yeah.
was the first time I felt like the intelligence community was marginally recovering from its like psychosis that it went through after 9/11. And then when bin Laden when that raid went down and was executed nearly perfectly, again, it was like this vindication and this weight was lifted off of all of these intel people who really were carrying that burden of failure since 9/11.
Were you able to kind of associate some of the breadcrumbs that led to that with some of the work that your teams had done, or just is that how people
So
were thinking about it?
we did, just because we had helped NGA build that model, the white model of
Oh,
the compound that's, I think, still at
yeah.
NGA. We did, we didn't build the model, but we gave them intel and information for them to use to check their, like the overhead stuff, right? Like the height, like all of that
You're
other
saying for Bin
stuff.
Laden's compound that they
Yeah, for
actually
Bin
hit in the
Laden's
end. Yeah.
compound. Yeah, our team plus DRI, which is I don't
Oh
remember what
man.
it stands for. Something at it's like the underground facilities and the like economics. I can't remember what it is, but DRI,
Direct rend
they
direct rendering? No. I don't know.
no,
I can't remember it.
but
Okay.
yeah, but they're the guys that they plus the electronic order of battle people. I know it sounds weird, but their equipment
Yep.
helps to like determine the thickness of the walls and the materials and all of that. So there's a lot of there's a lot of
Yeah.
DIA stuff that was in that rendering that they did, like the model that they made, the mock-up that they made. So
That is
yeah,
so cool to hear. Jeez.
yeah.
All right. I wanted to spend more time on the PDB, so I'm going to jump to that. But Michelle, is there anything else, like moments that you think back on from the pre-PDB time that you think might be worth highlighting before we jump? Especially if
Um,
they were impactful for you or loss, challenging, anything like that from those prior stints.
no, I don't think so. I think we've hit most everything. Like I said, my career has been like totally scattershot and totally Forrest Gumped. So I loved every minute of my career. I really did. I loved the deployments. I loved the people. I loved the missions. Like very rarely did I ever get my first choice of where I wanted to be stationed or what job
Yeah.
I wanted. But like every place that I went and every group of people that I met was pretty amazing. Training for it to be a FAO was probably my favorite thing ever, right? So getting to be a
Why is
foreign area
that?
officer, because I got to spend 21 months like visiting every country in Latin America, and we got to stay in decent hotels and eat like cultural food and like meet all these really important people in these countries. Like I would never have been able to meet these
Yeah.
people as just me, right? Like so to me that was my favorite couple of years. I got to go to advanced civil schooling. I mean, I now collect master's degrees like trolls because the army just keeps paying for
They
them.
do.
So
They do.
yeah, I mean, like as long as you're going to pay for it, I'm going to go for it.
I
So
do feel like
yeah.
the FAO program is a kind of fly under the radar type opportunity that people just don't see. I almost feel like there's a little bit of that with the special forces track where you end up going and doing all these cool schools. I mean, on the FAO track, you're living on that continent for a year and a half, 2 years,
Yeah.
learning the language, understanding the local culture, getting paid the
Yep.
same, and
Yep.
just soaking it all up. So it's really interesting. And I don't think a lot of folks know about it. It's a big selling point, I know, when it comes to
It is.
what assignment you're going for.
It is. Well, I mean, I used to tell people that, when they say crime doesn't pay, that's not actually true because being stationed in El Salvador, we actually got crime pay. I was like, this is
really?
awesome. Yeah, it's like danger pay, but it's called crime pay. Yeah, it was great. And I took my son and my mom with me because my husband was active duty. So like I had to go by myself and I had to have my own cover. And also I did CGSC in El Salvador.
Wow.
So yeah, and pretty much more than half of my classmates were former FMLN. Like,
no way.
Yeah. And here's a funny thing that most people don't know about El Salvador. Like back then, they loved Ronald Reagan. Every person that was in my class had a Ronald Reagan bobblehead in his car. Like hilarious. Yeah.
Why?
So, because they loved well, remember Reagan was the one that ended the war and started the peace dividend and all of that. So I think because they were like guerrillas. They were not going to have a job until Reagan's Secretary of State was like, well, why don't we just transition these guys into the military, right? And so that's why half the people in my class were former FMLN,
Interesting.
insurgents or guerrillas or whatever. I will tell you one other thing that was a challenge for me in Afghanistan. So remember I told you my oldest son is a combat engineer. We were stationed together in Afghanistan at the same time. Yes, it was horrible. And he was a route clearance platoon leader, right?
Stop.
Yeah. Tell me about it. And I was Flynn's EA. So I'm there every day getting the battle update, seeing my son's platoon and company in contact every other day, and my son refused to answer any of my texts, my emails, nothing. But he's like, nobody else, none of my other soldiers their mom gets to know what they're doing every day. So I'm like, but none of their moms are here looking at the bullet every day. Yeah, so that was really, really hard. Yeah, that was really hard.
Gosh, and you have the intel background, and that's kind of responsible for knowing what happens when things blow up and trying to predict where it's going to happen.
Yes, that was a very stressful time for me.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, he was with the 101st, so he was out at JBAD, and they were constantly yes. Remember,
what year was
constantly.
He there?
So I was there from 2009 to 2010. So he was there when I got there, and he left just before I did. So I think maybe it was the 101st that switched out for the 10th Mountain Division when Michelle Bradenkamp came in.
I was in Ed Coast with the 101st in 2008, and we rotated out at the very end of 2008, at Christmas.
So then
oh my gosh,
they probably rotated back in. Yeah.
Thing.
Yeah.
Oh, that's a terrible reality to have to face.
It was probably, when you were asking about challenges, that probably was the biggest challenge. It was very hard for me to focus on what I was doing. And then back in Iraq in 2007, I meant to go back to this, was so there were two priorities. One was the surge. And then the second was reconciliation. Remember, General Petraeus wanted to reconcile with, the Brotherhood, or I can't remember what they were calling themselves. But anyway, they were this faction of Al Qaeda that was like, okay, we don't want to be Al Qaeda anymore because you're going after Muslims and brothers and whatever. So, we want to reconcile. And my role, even though I was not I was a FAO, a Latin America FAO, they were like, we're going to have you do this Iraq FAO mission. I'm like, I don't speak Arabic. I don't know anything. They're like, yeah, well, needs of the army. You're here. You're the highest ranking person. So boop, you're it. So we got lost. We were going down, my translator and I were going down to Rustafia to have a meeting with Abu Aisha, right? Where we were supposed to evaluate using our human, abilities, whether or not this guy was trustworthy or not to be in a room with General Petraeus to discuss reconciliation. I was like, I'm so not qualified to do this job. Yeah. And you just do it. You just you just do it. You have no choice, right? So yeah, and we got lost in Rustafia. I thought for sure I was going to die. I was like, oh my God, I don't speak any Arabic. If they ask me what I'm doing,
just the two of you, Michelle?
Yes, in a thin skin.
No way.
Yes, driving around in this it looked like a freaking Lata,
in
like
uniform?
A Russian Lata. No, fortunately, no, not in uniform. But you could tell. I mean, I had my little vest on underneath and whatever. But they don't make extra small vests. So I looked like a clown, truly. Yeah. But yeah, that was a scary moment for me getting lost. But yeah.
All right. On the PDB side, I did want to just dig in a little bit more here. You mentioned you do that. I just assumed the time with Clapper was an intentional, we're going to have you sit here, get up to speed, and then you go to the Oval Office. But it sounds like that wasn't the case. That was just your assignment, and then you got picked to be in the Oval Office afterwards.
Well, no. So the walk-ons happened simultaneously. So I did once I was selected, that's when I got to read all the PDBs. And then when I was acting as the PDB briefer, that's when I would do all the walk-ons for Clapper or Cardillo. Now they were the ones that actually presented those. That was not me, and that was not part of the book. That was them. Yeah, that's why I said he was so Clapper was like 17 articles, right? Because I think he wasn't entirely on board with this is really a great idea, but okay, if this is what you want, then we'll do it this way. I don't know, because I never asked him about it, but totally different styles. Just when I tried to describe working for General Petraeus in Iraq, one style, very deliberate decision maker, doesn't he likes to have at least 80% of the information and the intelligence before he makes, a decision on what to do. Whereas working for Stan McChrystal, totally the opposite, right? He's like, get the F off the X, right? We'll figure it out as we go. Move out now and we can adjust right or left if we need to, right? So, yeah.
With that 80% marker, was that something Petraeus would actually verbalize? Hey, I want to have 80%. Or you kind of made this assessment?
No, we just kind of assessed that. He needed, because he would just keep asking for more and more. This is what we have. And he's like, well, this isn't enough. And so, we would just have to keep drips and drabs and dribbles of, intelligence until he felt comfortable or confident enough to, he really cared about soldiers. And, he really took that. I don't know if you remember at Cast Cube, that stupid risk matrix they made us do, the decision matrix, that deck mat or whatever the hell that thing was. Yeah. He took that very seriously. We are not going to waste soldiers' lives. So, we need to have the best intelligence that we can have. And he would just keep pushing us to make it better and better and more complete. Whereas, Stan had the best soldiers that we have anyway, right? So he's true. I trust you to make good decisions, on the move. Whereas I think Dave was I'm not sure that these 11 bang bangs are gonna figure it out. So we need to give them as much information as possible. So yeah,
it's interesting. What would you say is the hardest part of being a briefer?
Just memorizing everything, knowing everything, right? Holding all of that information, because you have to connect dots in the moment that he asks, right? And very hard to admit when you don't know something, right? Because you just don't want to look stupid. But I'll tell you, the first time he asked me about counter space, I was like, it took me a second because I thought he was talking about the kitchen, right? Because we hadn't, back in 2012, that wasn't a huge thing. There was a group that did that, but it wasn't widespread. Again, like nuclear and like economics, it wasn't something at my level that I had really been exposed to, right? Like I was just getting my arms wrapped around cyber at that point, right?
Yeah.
And so when he asked me like in the moment about, you know, like X country, you know, counter space, I'm like, but I'll have to get back to you on that because I'd never even heard that term at the time, you know, and that's like the worst is like because the first instinct is to just make some shit up, right? And you're just like, yeah, but you have to suck it back in and just be like, I'll get back to you on that. So yeah, but he was a great person to, you know, to brief. And
who in this case? Who is they?
Obama is a great,
okay.
easy brief. Yeah, very easy person to brief. Very smart. Like same thing with Hillary Clinton. Also very smart. And you could, in my opinion, you can tell how smart somebody is and how well they understand what you're presenting by the questions that they ask.
Interesting.
So,
you know,
yeah.
I'm going to mention something just real quick for people listening who are like, you know, I think there might be this idea that the PDB briefer is a political role. And my guess is it is not at all. So just for people listening, we're also going to interview Beth Sanner later on, who I believe was Trump's briefer, just so nobody listens to this and they're like, oh, this is all one side or the other. You, as we just described, sucked it up in all kinds of other places around the world like the rest of us, and you were selected to do that role. So I just don't want anybody to get this idea like, oh, this is all political here because we just mentioned Obama and Clinton in this case.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Yeah, that's just who happened to be there when I was the briefer. So, but I had done many PDB articles before that for, you know, for President Bush and even for Vice President Cheney, because he was, I gotta say, Cheney was actually a very engaged, you know, PDB reader. That's the guy. His name starts with a V, and it's not Vince
Vickers,
or maybe it is the guy that briefed me. Roland, and I think his last name starts with a V. I can't remember his last name, but anyway, his name is Roland, and he was Cheney's PDB briefer, and he was the one that told me, because I was so nervous when I got selected for the job. I wanted to go out and talk to anybody who had been a PDB briefer. He was the only one that was left, right? Like usually it's the pinnacle of your career, and then you do that, and you either take some high, like, you know, SIO or NIC or NIO kind of job where you're like untouchable, or you just get out, right? So he was the only one that was left that I could actually, like, that was still working as a, you know, an intel guy that I could actually talk to. But yeah, he was telling me, you know, yeah, you better be prepared for this and be prepared for that. And like, you know, he was telling me what I could expect, and you know, that like how many questions they would ask. And so I was very nervous about briefing. And I think that's the worst, is if you don't know the answer to a question, or you know, worse, you've forgotten something that you knew, right? Like that, to me, that's worse than just like, I've never heard of that before. But I did have one pretty spectacular night, and I can talk about this because my congressional testimony is out there, but I was the PDB briefer on duty the night of Benghazi.
Oh my gosh, please tell this. Yeah. Jeez.
Yeah. So that was a tough night for the PDB briefer. I can't go into all of the details, but I can go into generalities that, you know, like, so I was the night briefer that night, and we came in, and if you'll recall, that was also 9/11, right? Like, so yeah, so all of these,
right?
Yep, 2013. No, 2012.
Or is it 12? 12. Okay.
Yeah, 2012. Yeah, and so like I came in and I did my normal thing, started reading all the traffic, reading what the day briefer had left for me and all of that. And, you know, you do that for a couple of hours, you know, before before they have the brief prepared for you to read and edit and whatever. And your job at that point is to just harmonize everything and make sure that it sounds like it's coming from one voice, rather than, you know, like the NGA writes like this and the Treasury writes like this and whatever. So, you know, like you're just basically harmonizing. You're not changing the analysis or any of that. But that's important to note, because what I'm going to tell you is like the opposite of that. So So anyway, I'm reading and whatever, and we get some chatter like from the watch that like something is not right, and somebody in one embassy can't get in touch with their girlfriend or boyfriend in Benghazi, right? And so they're like, this is very unusual. We've been doing this for, like 9 months. This has never happened. I think something might be wrong because I've tried all these other numbers and we can't get in touch with anyone. So that's what first started it. Also on the TV, you've got like Tahrir Square. People are like in the US, that weirdo in Florida was burning like Qurans, and like it was all sorts of, it was like Halloween night, really, like all sort of like Halloween in the ER, right? Where you get like all the
you never know what's
stuff
coming in the door.
Exactly, but it's going to be bad. So anyway, like first reports from the field, they're always wrong, and we were getting these reports that somebody was being dragged through the streets and like all these things that were just not quite right. And then, so we start to realize that, okay, something has happened. We don't know what it is. We can't really get in touch with anybody. Nobody can find, the ambassador. And so we start doing what we do and pinging all the different places. And at this point, I asked for the Libya briefer from the agency to come up, because that's what they do, right? If there's like a, but actually it's not just that, but like if whatever topics, if you don't feel comfortable briefing it or whatever, you don't think all the facts or the context behind it, they'll send up the person who wrote the article to give you the background and make sure everything, that you feel confident that you could answer any questions. So at this point, they send in like some kid, like I don't even know how old he was. Like honestly, like, do you have a note from your mom to be here? Like, honestly, I probably shouldn't say that in case he's listening to this, but like, he didn't even have a whisker, like not even a whisker. And I'm telling you, he could not have been more than 21, 22 years old. I'm like, how much time could you possibly have been the Benghazi guy? Right?
Michelle, how much stress do you feel at this point? Like, how much do you know of what's gone on at this point in Benghazi? Like, do you understand that something's happening? No, you're not.
Yes, okay. I'm not stressed because, like, I don't know, your military training locks in, right? And you like, this is where I excel. Like, I excel in chaos for whatever reason, because it's crazy chaos colors in my head. I don't know, but I get in that zone, right? That click in, and you're asking questions, and you're, asking for this, and have you tried that? And have we heard from this? And, like put a collection emphasis over here and do this. And you just snap in and you're doing your thing. Right. And so when the kid comes in to brief me, right, on like all of the groups that are operating in Libya, and, like, so he gives me his assessment that he's like, yeah, this is, an unplanned attack, and it's this group and that group, and here's why I think. And I was like, what? I was like, no. And he's like, no, really? I'm like, no. And I'm like, no, really. Like, I have 20 years of Army experience, and I'm telling you right now that the way that this is happening, like clockwork, right? Like, no terrorists wake up in the morning with, their RPG packed in their backpack to go to the mall just in case they get a target of opportunity on the way, right? I was like, that's not how this happens, right? And I was like, by this time, it was almost like 5 or 5:30. The book has to be done by 6 because we have to be out the door by like 6:30 at the latest, right? They drive us over to the White House, right? And I'm like, no, I'm changing your entire report here because I completely disagree. Like, I'm like, my little voice, which has never been wrong, is telling me that this is wrong. So I'm going to rewrite it. Man, did I cause a storm.
Did that just go to the 7th floor at the agency? I mean, like, you're on the 7th floor, I guess, but
yes. So it's only 5:30, right? So no one's in yet, right? It's 5:30. So I have total say on what goes in the book. And they've told me this many times, right? Like, you're the last line of defense, right? Whatever you think, if you need to change this or add this or pull an article, which I didn't do it very often, but like, I had done it, as long as you can justify it and explain why, it wasn't a big deal. But on this one, I was like, nope. I was like, I came from JITF CT. I know all of these, I was a
Yeah.
watch officer on JIT of CT. I know Ansar al Sunna. I know what their like MO is, and this is just not right. Like, and also I'm a military intelligence officer. Like, I actually understand how battles work and how like insurgents conduct operations. I was like, there's no way that you are going to convince me that this was a target of opportunity that was inspired by Tahrir Square in Egypt and somebody burning a Quran in Florida.
Yeah.
I was like, nope. So I rewrote the whole thing. And then when I went and I briefed, I came back and the president was just addressing the public saying, that this was a planned attack and, this and that and da da da, da right? Oh my God. When I got back, Mike Morrell was about to like literally like holding a scimitar to like cut off my head because I dared to disagree with his analyst and I didn't get permission to change it before I sent it to the president. And then he went right after me to the White House and he was like, nope, that's not our assessment. Our assessment is that this was a spontaneous attack and that, it was this group or that group, or I don't even remember what he said, but like it became this huge brouhaha. And he even writes about me in his book about like that dumb DIA chick, right? Like,
Does he
yeah.
really?
And yeah, he doesn't mention my name, but yes, there's in the chapter on Benghazi, the PDB briefer is me. Yeah, the PDB briefer from another agency or whatever, I think is how
Yeah.
he refers to me. Yeah. And so like, I didn't get fired, right? But like they were really mad. And the reason I didn't get fired is because the PDB is now run by three agencies, right? So it's the CIA, the INR, State Department, and DIA. Those are the three that are in charge of it, right? So, Bob Katrinos was not going to let them fire me. So anyway, but I'll tell you, it was from that point on, it was not a great relationship. And he was just the acting director because Petraeus had just been removed for his, indiscretions.
Yeah.
So anyway, he was trying to establish himself with the president and like this, that, and the other. So then on that Friday, we were traveling. I was traveling with the president. We went to Beverly Hills because remember, 2012 was a campaign year. So we did a lot of campaign travel, a lot to Los Angeles. And that was when I had to tell the president that, guess what? Because he had gone after Morrell went there, he went out and he changed his story and said, we have now got better intel that says it was spontaneous and da 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 da, right? So that Friday, I was the one that had to go and tell the president, nope, we were right the first time. But you can't say I was right?
Yeah.
Like you can't do that you're like, and he was not happy about that. He's like, how many billions of dollars do we spend on intelligence and blah, 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 right? Like, and I'm like, shoot the messenger. Yes. But yeah.
I mean, how did you, I don't know, how did you handle that questioning, like from a very high level of your kind of integrity, your capabilities,
You just
professionalism?
accept responsibility. You just accept responsibility for the community. I mean, clearly somebody of his caliber is going to know that it's not you personally or whatever, but yeah, but yes, that was, yep. And, like Morale still to this day, like we had a little tete-a-tete at Sea Island, Georgia in, I don't know, like 2017. We were both at the first cipher brief, whatever getaway in Sea Island, Georgia. And he told his side of the story and I stood up and I told my side of the story. And I was
Good for
like,
you. But I mean,
yeah,
it's
I'm
out
like,
there, right? Like your side of the story.
yes.
Yeah,
Yes. Yes. At that point, I had already been grilled by Trey Gowdy. Like we went in for congressional testimony and they were really, like they were grilling me. I mean, I had to get a lawyer. I had to get a lawyer to like represent me it was very stressful, but in the end, it all worked out.
I should say for people who question this, you could just check out the book or the movie, but we also interviewed Kris, Tanto, Paranto on the show here, who was on the ground during that fight. And yeah, I mean, that was a serious coordinated attack. So
Yes.
God,
Yep.
that's unfortunate. That's how the game is played, I guess, when you're at that high level that you were at the time.
I mean, we had so many little incidents like that. Like, you know, people don't understand that the press, like all these leaks that come out about things, those are intentional, right? Like the government leaks things on purpose to get a reaction out of the public or to force Congress to do something or to highlight someone's weakness or whatever. And that became like a huge issue when I was at PDB because we had a leaker. We didn't know who it was. It turned out to be the vice chairman, but remember that? It was Cartwright, I think. Yeah, yeah. But it's not like they chose to do that on their own. They were directed, right? Like anytime somebody gets in trouble for leaking something, it is very rare that that person just decided on their own, especially if they're a military person or a career government person. It is very rare that they are just like, well, I think the public needs to know this. No, they were directed to do that.
What made it hard?
I didn't know that until
when you say that. When you say that it makes it hard, what makes that hard in your role?
I'll give you one example. So remember we had the underwear bomber guy or whatever? Yeah. So that
really ruined air travel for the rest of us again.
Yes, exactly. Worse than the shoe bomber. Yeah. So anyway, that happened. And when it came in, it was so tightly controlled that like the PDB, there's PDB, right, which is oval only, which means only the president gets it, you know, and I guess probably Jack Lew, I think the president had made it so that his chief of staff would also get everything. Then you have like oval +3 and oval +7 and like different distributions, right? So when that came in, it was oval only. And one of my very good friends who was Napolitano's briefer was like, I need to be able to brief this. You need to put it in my book. And I'm like, I can't. I'm sorry, but this is like, it says oval only. You guys know the rules. I'm not making this up. And she's like, well, I need you to get an exception or whatever. And I'm like, I'll try, but we have like, 38 minutes. Like, I don't think that's going to happen. She's like, but you can make that call. I'm like, I can, but I'm not going to in this instance. Right. I'm like, this is super like tightly held. Right. And we're like, this means that they know who it is and they're going to try and take him down, like on the plane or at the airport or whatever. I'm like, I can't, right? Like, no. So like they were mad, like Beth was mad at me. And so not Beth Sanner, a different Beth, but Beth and then 2 or 3 others that thought their principals should know this, right? Because they get shit on if like their principals find out something from the president that the president thought they should know, right? So it's hard if you're the executive coordinator, like you have to make these decisions, right? So I was like, no, I'm sorry. I mean, I love you guys, but no. So I get in the car, right? Like my driver is driving me. We're on the GW Parkway and he turns on the radio and guess what I hear? What has leaked? NPR is now reporting about the underwear bomber. Like, no way. After I just fell on my sword saying, no, you can't have that. Like the distribution is limited, right? And there it is on NPR. Did I feel like a schmuck or what when I came back? I was like, I'm sorry. I don't know who leaked it. I don't know how it leaked. I don't know. But so
do you think that was the mechanism was through the other briefer that they took that and shared it?
No, I don't think, no, because no. I mean, like, no, I don't think so at all. Because it was literally, I was on my way to the briefing. No one briefed before the president. No one gets their book before the president, right? Like he's the first. So it wasn't one of them. I don't know who it was, but like it was clearly intentionally leaked. But yeah, that was horrible for me, right? Because then like all my friends are just like glaring at me when I come in. Yeah. So it was bad. But I really got along well with them apart from that. Yeah.
You do that job for a year, right? Or like 11 months, 12 months. Are you just burnt out at the end of that?
Yes, because the president takes a brief every day except Sunday, or at least mine did. And you have to put together.
That is funny that you say it's really funny the way you just said that so matter of fact, but it's true. Okay. Sorry. Keep going.
Well, I mean, I heard that like other presidents don't do that, right? Like, I don't know. I don't know. If you look on Politico, you can see they have the president's schedule pretty much on there every day. And President Biden, I don't think takes a briefing every single day. So, and I know from what I've heard Beth Sanner speak before, and I don't think Trump took a a PDB every day either.
Okay.
So it just really depends on, who the president is and what his preferences are. But yeah. Yeah. And that's another cool thing that you get. Like, not only do you get access to the White House, but you get access to the president's calendar, because you have to know who's coming to visit, what kind of issues,
yeah.
right? Like if there's any like brief books that need to be made or whatever, because like if he's traveling, he gets a whole separate book on like all of the stuff. So, it's yeah. And the other cool thing was in 2012, we got to do a book for Romney as well. So because he was the candidate, candidates get their own PDB after they secure the nomination. So after July, he started getting a book as well.
Is there a feeling as you go into that role that you could, if you do something wrong, you could get pulled from that? Are there examples of people who have been removed, either they didn't jive with the principle or they said, I don't know, too many times? Like, is there this weight hanging over you in that capacity?
I mean, not really. I don't think anyone ever told me that happened. I mean, just as a military person, you're always afraid of that, right? I mean, like, because for any small infraction, you could be, be removed for cause or whatever. But I think the way they structured it with that triumvirate, I think it added a lot of like safety and protection.
Yeah.
And they had a dedicated, like each of the agencies also had a dedicated desk during like office hours to do, like emphasis, like stuff we needed them to do. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, geez. I'll get you out of here soon, I promise, Michelle.
Sure.
You had a chance to meet some very successful, high power, high octane individuals. Are there one or two that you still look at, like you learned a lot from them, maybe the way that they interacted with people, how they consumed information, just how they went about their professional lives, that still stick with you?
Well, just the ones that I think I've already met. Well, my very first sort of mentor was a guy named Troy Kuntz. He was a major when I was just a, brand spanking new second lieutenant. And, like he really like tried to explain to me what was important about like intel, right? He's like, it's not getting all the facts right. He's like, it's not always being right. He's like, because you're not like, we don't have crystal balls, right? It's it's being confident in your analysis and being able to show the math, right? Explain to the person that you're briefing why you think what you think, be able to back it up, and you'll be okay. And he was the one that told me, like, you should always try to like challenge yourself. Always try to like reach that next goal early, which I've done that in all parts of my life because of that. Like whether it's running, whether it's, like anything that I've done, like I've always tried to stretch myself. But working for General Petraeus and working for General McChrystal, amazing experiences, because both of them like reading 4 books at one time, right? So like even while I was deployed, I was still trying to read all these books, and like
you're trying to read the same books that they're reading just to Why would you
because
do that?
They would be well, because they're constantly like quoting from those books or whatever, right? And so I think the one he was reading while I was there that I still have, which I still never finished, was the Scorpion and the Starfish.
Oh, I've heard of them. Yeah.
Yeah. It's really good. It's about, it's a leadership book, and it's about why decentralized leadership works better than having like the centralized leadership, which is why I think Russia is failing. But that's a totally another story, another podcast or whatever. Yeah. But yes, they don't get the starfish and the scorpion idea. But yeah, so I really loved working for them. I really enjoyed my time in the Pentagon. I had a great boss. His name was Ken Stanley, and he was not military. He was a lifer, a DIA lifer, but he was the one that taught me not to take myself too seriously. Right. He's like, because you're an action officer. He's like, you're going to be here and you're going to be gone and no one's going to remember. He's like, unless you save a general from a burning building, he's like, they're not going to remember you. Because I was always so stressed out because at the time, our J2, I will withhold his name because he's very vindictive. But anyway, RJ2, when I left, he wrote me, like, when he went to sign my like farewell thing, he's like, to my favorite briefer who couldn't ever find any more cartoonish graphics. Like that was what he, and I was like, I was sad. And Ken was like, he goes, this should be a badge of honor. He's like, this is actually kind of funny. He's like, you're going to tell people about this and they're going to think he's a total, like,
Yep.
blah, blah. And so he was a really great boss and a great mentor who told me, he's like, just don't take yourself so seriously and you'll enjoy it a lot more and you won't worry as much about like screwing things up. But I've worked for some great guys. Scotty Miller, I worked for Scotty Miller in the pack. Amazing, incredible person. Yes, probably one of the most sincere and genuine general officers I've ever worked with, besides McChrystal.
Yeah. Oh, that's amazing. Yeah. All right. For Sage Raven, you cover everything. What are 2 or 3 of the main things you end up spending most of your time? I got to imagine it's Ukraine and Israel, but maybe there's some other stuff that's China. I don't know.
Yeah, it's mostly China, Ukraine, and Israel. But it's not just how the conflict is going, right? So I try to talk to my clients about the second and third order effects and impacts of these things. So, like, for example, in the, Israel-Hamas conflict, I keep telling everybody, like, be prepared in the next 6 to 12 months for terrorism to come right back, right? Like, because the whole reason that they attacked us on 9/11 was because of our support for Israel. It wasn't because we're great Americans and they just hate America and we're Christians. It was because of our support for Israel. And they have raised so much money. They've recruited so many people just over the last 7 months that, like, it's going to happen. It's building somewhere.
You're saying for the West, not just in Israel, but like kind of coming back.
No, not for everywhere. Direction. Yes. Yeah. Everywhere. So, so it's those second and third order effects that, like, okay, oil prices, is the risk priced into the market? Are the risk premiums appropriate? Those kinds of things. I can do that as well, right? And those are second and third order, but the ones that are more important are the ones that are, like, I don't want to say invisible, but they need someone to, like, shine the light on them, right? And that's kind of what I like to do, like how the world is becoming so much more unstable because the United States is pulling back, right? Like, we are, we're reducing our presence, and that has second and third order effects. Some are good, but some are bad. But you can always connect the dots back to, like, us not being there or us not supporting that thing anymore or whatever. So that's what I do. And I love what I do. I do basically PDBs for corporate executives. Yeah. We call it the executive update brief. And then and those are one-on-ones or like for boards and C-suites. And I do a lot of public speaking. I do a lot of like geopolitical keynotes because I love to hear myself talk, as you can tell.
Yeah,
and then I just do training and education. Like, if you want to know how to do open source intelligence analysis or research or whatever, like, I put together 6 different classes on, like, for risk professionals, for investors, for corporates, et cetera, et cetera. So that's what I do at Sage Raven.
For people listening who hear this and they're like, either they're considering a career doing something similar to your background, or maybe you got a parent who has a kid who's exploring opportunities and they think, oh, this is quite interesting. What are some of the things that make a good analyst, like, or some of the attributes that might make somebody successful in that role or lend themselves to that role?
Neurodivergence. Like, seriously, I mean, if you're ADHD or if you have synesthesia, if you think differently than everybody else or the majority of other people, it's very, very useful, right? You can see connections that other people might miss. You can, stack and shuffle and categorize, or catalog information differently. And it just helps you to do that kaleidoscope thing that I was talking about, like with the different lenses. And I also think, like, being neurodivergent helps you to sort of operate more like a balloon, right? Because you can get down really low and get very tactical and see the ground and understand what's happening. But you can also, like, adjust your ballast and go up high and see what's coming around the corner and over the hill. And those are really, really important skills, I think, for, analysts. And they're skills that you can learn. You don't have to be born thinking a certain way, right? Just whatever is different about you, embrace that with every fiber of your being, and use that to your advantage, and you will be an amazing analyst.
Very interesting. Very interesting. Okay, there's two questions I ask everybody, and then I'll let you go here. One, I think you mentioned earlier, so I might tweak this slightly with the chess set from your grandfather. However, I try to ask people, when you're deployed, is there something that you carried with you or brought with you that had sentimental value, a good luck charm, or something that somebody had given you that meant something to you? I would assume the chess set. Is there anything else that comes to mind for that?
I took a lock of my son's hair.
Did you? Which,
yeah, when I went to Iraq,
the oldest son?
No, the second one, because he was only 5. And like every night before I like deployed, I traced the outline of his face with my finger while he was sleeping, and just like tried to memorize every wrinkle, every like dimple, every, piece. And then one night while he was sleeping, he had like this hair that was here, and I kept trying to push it back so I could do the trace, and it just kept falling forward. And I was like, I just took the scissors that were right next to the like literally cool. Like, kid scissors, and snipped it off. And I'm like, it means the universe is telling me I need to take this with me. So I did.
Where did you keep it?
Yeah.
Did you have it in
my
pocket?
Yeah. In that little pocket right here in your, like the one with the pens that you're supposed to put your pens in. Yeah. That's where I never did the pen thing, but yeah.
That is really neat. Yeah. Anything that you brought with you or did going into brief, like in the Oval Office? Was there like a special pen that you had, or?
No, I should have, but no, I actually didn't. What was very cool about it was I didn't have to wear a uniform because of the, what's it called? The amendment where you can't be in uniform, the Hatch Act. You can't wear a uniform when you're like doing campaign activities or things like that. So they just, they gave me a wardrobe allowance and like told me to go to town. So I did.
Very cool. Very cool. Yeah. And then the last question, I think I know the answer to this, but I ask everybody, as you look back on a very long career with some very stressful moments that we certainly didn't hit on even close to all of them, but as you look back on that time, would you go back and do it again?
100%. 100%. I loved my career, and it's really made me and shaped me, into a better parent, a better wife, a better like citizen, and that is evident even today. Like I moved to Minneapolis, Minnesota. I didn't know anybody here, not one single person. I was like, it was too hot in Virginia. I'm like, I don't like to run when it's 90 degrees outside. I was like, I'm going to be fat. I'm just going to get old. Like now that I'm out of the military, if I don't like have that to force me. So we decided to move here. And I didn't know anybody, but we are the only house on the block that has a pool. And we have all sorts of really interesting people on our street. We have a lot of like pro-Trump, a lot of pro-Biden, a lot of like people with different flags and things. And because of like my experiences in the military, like uniting people and just getting people to work together, everybody comes over. It doesn't matter like what their flag or whatever. Everybody comes over here for Memorial Day and for 4th of July to come, hang out, have burgers, and swim at the pool. So, and I believe that's from my military experience.
That is awesome. Thank you so much, Michelle, for this time. This is far more than I could have hoped for. For people to reach you online, we'll have everything in the description, but is there an easy website or social media handle you'd like to share?
Yes, it's so email is just michelle@sage-raven.com. And that's the website, sage-raven.com. So, and I'm at Geopolitical for Substack.
Cool. Yeah. All right. I should have asked, why Sage Raven for the name? Does that hold special meaning?
Sages were like the wizards and mages that provide wise wisdom and advice to rulers and battlefield commanders, warfighters. Mm-hmm. And ravens carry messages, and ravens are the ones that are able to like see far ahead and come back and report back, hey, this is what I see ahead. Wow. So that's what I try to do with my clients is, give them a little bit of, what might be coming next. So.
Thank you so much for the time, Michelle. This is great.
Thank you. It was really fun.
hope you enjoyed that combat story. It's the first PDB Briefer we've had on, and we're going to have Beth Sanner on later, as you heard me say during this interview. That is, of course, the briefer to former President Trump, so we can hear both sides. But as you heard me say in this interview, this is not political. These are people who could be from either side of the aisle and are brought in to be briefers. The military knows that better than anyone, having to put aside any political leanings to do the job, as you all know that we do and have done for years. I found this fascinating. I've worked with PDB briefers. I provided the raw intel that was included in briefs. I've had to double check things before it went forward. I know that analysts work very hard on any product that they know is going to get into the PDB. As collectors, we always want to know something we worked on was put into the PDB. I mean, that is the height of success. If you're collecting intel that's so important that the president has to hear it. But the person who actually delivers that brief has a very important role, as you can imagine. They do not hand it out to anyone, so don't believe Michelle's humble approach. No surprise, as an Army officer, that's how she describes her work, but she is a heavy hitter in that community. And to be the first military briefer says something. Very cool to hear some of the inside baseball, and I can only imagine some of the stories she has that she probably can't tell on air. Hey, with that, I just want to say thanks again for sticking this out with me for so long. You can check out what we're doing at combatstory.com/newsletter. You can support us at patreon.com/combatstory. We got a couple comments from listeners from our interview with Kevin Seif, obviously a former Marine and Navy SEAL who never saw combat and has made peace with that. And you would never think somebody who is a Marine and a SEAL during the time that Kevin served would have missed that, but it hasn't stopped him from supporting others. And I think it's a very valuable lesson, because there are times where I think I'm an imposter because I didn't do enough. I wasn't in a Tier 1 Special Ops community. I didn't fly in 160th. Obviously, I'm grateful for having the chance to go to combat a couple times, but it's not 10, 11, 12, 18 times like some of the people out there. To know that someone like Kevin is still willing to give back, even though he didn't go downrange, is pretty inspiring to me. And it doesn't have to just be in a combat scenario, but maybe just that imposter syndrome that people feel. That's an example of somebody who's fought it and continues to do good work. So with that, on that episode, Carl Fisher, 4163, a recurring supporter here. Also, a subscriber, thank you very much, says, very good listen, thank you. I never saw combat, but I really enjoy your work. They all need to keep talking. Thank you for this. And then some great positive remarks from Dr. Mark in Texas 400. Thanks for sharing this. Gabriel Hutchinson 156, thank you for your service. And Teresa Martin 8344, excellent interview. Thank you for standing in for us. So with that, I hope you all have a great rest of your week or weekend, wherever you are. And hopefully this combat story got you through a workout, a walk in the park, a day at the office, a commute, who knows. But thank you for sticking it out with us for so long, folks. I greatly appreciate it, and we could not do it without you. Stay safe.